And we should be live. Hello chat, tell me if you can hear me. I'm just reading through the questions. Lots of stuff about altars in the Vatican. If you want to listen to Malachi Martin or whatever, that's your choice. But it is irrelevant to this. Because this particular stream, I can now tell that I can be heard, is about my choice, well, God's choice, frankly, that I became Catholic. Because I received a comment a couple of days ago from a guy who said that I came across as very puritanical, as very Jansenistic, and I know that there are a lot of people, particularly secular viewers, that think the same thing. And how I can sometimes come across as perhaps very over the top with the hardcore Catholicism. And so I wanted to sort of give a stream explaining that. Because a lot of people like to hear a conversion story. And I understand that it's something that people might want to hear from me, but this is the real purpose. The purpose is to make it clear that, no, I'm not a Jansenist, as I have been accused of. I'm not someone who is overly puritanical in the way I conduct my life. Although I can understand why someone would get that impression, right? I talk very formal. But I'm not off stream and off of, actual debate. So I just wanted to give a bit of context there. Also, the chant was Agnus Dei, Charlie Adams. Also, at the same time, I haven't got this on my notes, but I've seen people asking about my rather negative attitude towards traditional Catholicism, so that's going to be included on the agenda, I think. So I want to explain what I'm approaching this from, because of course I am not the church, obviously. I'm a person who joined it and is a catechumen, a seemingly eternal catechumen, and someone who, of course, has his own set of assumptions first that he approached this with, that he already had, and a lot of history that has led to the perhaps overly aggressive pushing of these values. So I'm going to basically try and go through in rough detail how I grew up, what I saw at uni, and what ultimately led me into the faith. Because I'm obviously not going to go into all details. What did I convert from? Well, we'll find out in a second. So, the family I was born into was pretty rich, to be honest. I'm not going to pretend to be working class, because I'm not. I'm not higher class either. Family was higher management, upper middle class. Right? Very typical corporate management style people, I'd say. However, that does not mean that life was especially easy. Yeah, I am still a catechumen. For much of my teenage years, both of my parents were quite ill, and in such a way that I didn't have to, do some of the things like some of these amazing young carers do for their kids, for their parents, right? I never ever got to that point, but it was enough that it kind of impacted the way I lived. Although, the thing is, I'm not really sure quite how much. But in essence, I was stuck at home quite a lot from about the age of 11 or 12 onwards, right? Now, what I wasn't is one of these people who was stuck without friends. There's never a time where I've not had friends. But I will say that I was stuck at home a lot because of, frankly, my own concern for them. And so I had a lot of time to read. I had a lot of time to program, in fact. I developed a lot of my skills that I use right now as a teenager, but I was, suffice to say, not in a very happy place for a lot of those years. Now, I didn't do anything over the top, like dye my hair. Like, a lot of my friends dyed their hair. A lot of them got into metal music. I did. A lot of them did, sort of rebellion stuff. I never really did. But I was on edge all the time, and on account of the illness, I sometimes didn't really interact very well with other people who would try and bounce with me. Now nowadays I could see what they were saying, right? But because of the context I was in, I was often very resentful because I thought they were attacking me, but they weren't. But I still had friends, so I was still, pretty typical, very egotistical, very, very egotistical teenager, right? And as time went on, I calmed down and realised I needed to change. And this was around 16, and so I changed. I'd read a lot of work, a lot of books already. That was kind of expected of me, really. That's why I talk like this. Like, I don't talk like I'm like down my lads down. I don't talk like I'm at pub with my mates, right? Don't talk like that on here. But I talk like this on here. In fact, I've even been told by friends of mine that I have a completely different voice on here than the one I have in real life. You see, I had that expected of me, so that's how I behave. But yeah, so as I got older, I sort of realised I was behaving in a ridiculous way and developed, and became better friends with more people. And what I saw as I got older was this profound rot, I suppose. You see, I already knew it beforehand, because when I grew up in a pretty nice neighborhood for the most part, right? Very, very wealthy. And so I was very sheltered, but when I went off to the academically selective school I was at, there's something called the 11 Plus in the UK, I was thrown into a school that was in a very rough area. In fact, one of my friends ended up having to stab someone in self-defense. So it was not the nicest school. Actually, another time, a guy at the school had been accused of assaulting a girl in that way, and so a mob of the Polish geezers came down on the school, and we didn't see much of him after that. I don't know if he actually did it, but it was a pretty rough area. But I saw that, and I had a lot of respect for the working class guys, because I saw the virtue in them. I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it, but I saw the virtue in them. But I also saw a lot of the rot, beforehand. There was one guy whose sister had 2 children before she was 18. I think with 2 different guys. I can't remember that part though. So I sort of knew it was there, but then as I turned 16, 17 and 18, the upper middle class families started to break down. Because I think what happened is that a lot of them had only had 1 or 2 children, and the child was, reaching 16, 17, 18, and they're like, okay, they're off to uni, we can break up now. And I started to see that very close to me as well. I saw this attitude of constant cheating, and a lot of very, 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 very unhappy people, and a lot of girls who would behave in such a way that was they try and secure themselves someone so they wouldn't go flying. But I didn't really think of it that much. I was too focused on my own, well, maybe not inadequacy, but my own anger to really notice that. I only noticed that in retrospect. But there was a lot of problems, and I knew this was there, and so I had some very I think one of my history teachers put it individual on quote opinions on history, because I read through, I saw the history, and I saw what was going on now, and I had my own political opinions because I was watching people like Sargon, and so they came out in class, and I was very, very blunt about them. I've always been very blunt. So as I went to university afterwards, I had this rough idea of things were sort of breaking down a bit. I think I did anyway, at least in the back of my mind. And this idea of, I think the one grace that really got me here was that the entire time I never fell for subjectivism. In fact, at school, I remember I had an hour-long argument with a friend of mine because he insisted that he could be both Sikh and Catholic at the same time. And even though I was atheist, it really bothered me. yeah. So as I got to uni, I'd heard a lot about uni through people like Sargon. I heard it was a very leftist, I guess, place. No, CL. I didn't deny that. No, what I said is that Israel was the primary cause for the Iraq War. That was one of the ones I came out with in school. I also believe that a cabal of intellectuals was behind the French Revolution as well. But you can see that in the sources, and I think anyone with any real ability to research into the French Revolution can find that. But that's irrelevant. So I got to university, and this kind of manifest suffering that was mostly blotted out by my own recognition of my own became really manifest. I got on reasonably well with my housemates for the first 2 weeks of my first year, and then I just fell out with them. Yeah. Yeah, I came up with some really, really edgy stuff in class. Like I defended like all kinds of horrible things in hindsight, because I didn't have any Christian morality at all. Like Saddam Hussein tier stuff, and I didn't really care. But yeah, I got to uni, and the thing that I was expecting didn't really happen. I was expecting a lot of leftism. I was expecting a lot of, the very typical SJW stuff that you'd see from people like Sargon and the feminist direct compilations that were really popular in 2016. What I instead got hit by was a massive, massive wall of nihilism. Depressed people everywhere. Like, absolutely everywhere. A lot of the people were kind of like average, but you can see it in someone's eyes. You can see it in someone's eyes, and when they're drunk, when they're unhappy. And I was no exception to that in a lot of ways, right? I went out and I drank like tons. I always was a bit of a big drinker. I flirted with girls, I did. I didn't do drugs. No, I didn't do drugs. I did the more societally acceptable things, maybe. So I did all of that, and I saw that most of the people were very miserable. In fact, one of the things that I'm convinced of to this day is that a lot of people get involved, particularly in the promiscuity, because they lose hope of ever finding a good partner, and so they indulge in it. But I saw this very firsthand as well. Like, a lot of people who know me in real life aren't aware just how absolutely nuts I went in my first year of uni. They saw me sometimes, but I was out 4 nights a week drinking. 3-4 nights a week. And I still got a good grade on my degree, but yeah, I think I'd average out about, I want to say 8 pints, but there's part of me also saying 13 pints in an evening. And I think the most I ever did was somewhere in the region of 20 to 25. So I was drinking a lot. And because of the way I guess my genetics are, this would hype me up. So I'd go ballistic about, philosophical stuff sometimes. Sometimes I'd go ballistic about other things. And at the same time, I was involved with this girl. I think she considered me her boyfriend, but I didn't consider her my girlfriend, and so I just went around with it, but just talking to other girls. And this is where it gets important, because I was already talking to people through YouTube on politics, and I'd already become. Had I become a deist at that point? I don't think I had. But I did know about the fact that religion made people happier. I'd relentlessly mocked this traditional Catholic guy that I'd met in the first month of my uni. I'm eating my words now, aren't I? But I met this girl, and I noticed that she was unhappy, and she'd do things like message me at 5 in the morning. She once did it pretty much every night for a month, and she'd complain about me being miserable, and I said, well, you can go to church, that'll make you happy. 20 cans? No, 20 pints. So that's, it's more than 20, it's somewhere between 20 and 25, right? I was absolutely, completely all over the place. But I've never passed out or drunk. Yeah, but I was telling this girl, go to church, this got a eugenic effect, it'll make you feel happy. I still know the Catholic guy. I haven't talked to him in, I want to say 8 months. 9 months. Nine, actually 10 months. Let's say 10 months. So I told her to get into the church, and at the same time I was talking to a bunch of tradcaths online. Because I was doing political videos, I wanted to be involved more with the skeptics, because I thought, well, I've got some ideas of how to solve the problems that you're talking about. Why don't I propose them and see where I go? And instead I ended up involved with the distributist, and involved with Fritz Imperial and people like that. And also, at the same time, I was involved a lot with edgier people. I won't name them. But suffice to say, I became deist, and so 20 pints, that would be about 30 cans. Yeah, so I was getting involved with a lot of edgier stuff when I was a deist, because what essentially happened to me at uni was that I saw the despair of the people at university, and I realised that their way of life didn't work. And because I already had this recognition that truth was exterior to me, I was seeking something to actually pursue that was true. Because I knew that I didn't have it from, the school that I'd been to. Yeah. In fact, actually, I'll talk about the specific intellectual conversion I had, because the intellectual conversion was probably different from the moral one. Because Vard the Confessor has just mentioned a guy called Mathoma, who is the guy that converted me. I originally acknowledged the existence of God because of a Protestant, in fact, what's the word? He wasn't Amish, but Anabaptist. He was one of these Anabaptists called Praise of Folly, and he convinced me of the existence of God through Descartes and through not the ontological argument, the cosmological argument. Mathoma specifically convinced me of Catholicism, because he convinced me that the final cause, or the very first cause, had power over everything because of his innate existence as pure being. There's a number of other things like Gödel's incompleteness theorem and needing a source of all of these baseless axioms to justify things, but they're largely irrelevant. That's the intellectual conversion, which is one thing. But the thing that really matters is that my life didn't change all that much. I was increasingly moving in a direction where I was drinking, maybe not drinking less alcohol at that point, but I was moving a lot away from, going to nightclubs to to seek girls. I still went along to nightclubs for quite a while. I actually worked in one. That was a changing experience. I'll talk about the moral conversion as well, because it's probably more interesting. Because one of the turning points was that I worked in a nightclub, and I've talked about this at length on different streams, and I was very depressed by the whole thing. In fact, one particular instance, there were two instances that stuck in my head. First of all, there was this girl with 7 guys, and she ordered all of their drinks, and she must have spent about £40, which is 50 US roughly, and she ran off without paying, and I had to follow with this gigantic Polish guy. Now bear in mind, I'm at least I'm like 6'1", and this Polish guy was about 7'6", and we're going around this nightclub around midnight seeking out this girl and these 7 guys, or however many guys there were. The other one was when this guy came to the bar around about, I want to say about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he's weeping quite profusely, and he goes to me, oh, I was only mean to them because I wanted to get with them, And I like that particular memory, because it really does sum up a lot of the way that guys behave at uni. A lot of them just want to be loved, and a lot of them try to be very masculine, prototypically, maybe not prototypically, like stereotypically even masculine, but it doesn't work, because they're just as desperate to be with a girl as a girl is often to be with a guy. Like, some girls are ridiculous, like I said. And also around this time, I'd expelled this girl from my life who thought that I was her boyfriend, And yeah, that came back to bite me later on. Yeah, so I went through this night, and I realised just how bad nightclubs were. I could never really go to them again after that, because I knew that they were bad from when I'd shown up there drunk before, and I've done the whole grinding thing and everything, which is in retrospect gross, because I never stopped and thought this is someone's daughter. But you see, like, it really did change my mind, and the breaking point for me, because I didn't go to that job after that. I did the one shift and I was out of it. I didn't even collect the money. Was when I was washing. Like, if you've ever been to a nightclub, they often have at the back of the bar these fridges that have windows, and then they've got a silver boundary around them, like some sort of metal boundary. Yeah, I was washing one of these fridges off, and I caught a steel splinter through my thumb, and it went in about 3 inches. Nah, like, I don't know, 7 foot. Like, he was huge though. He was like taller than a Swedish friend of mine. He's like 6'7", and he was as broad as I am, and I'm very, very broad. He was huge. He was like an enemy out of Doom. He was huge. This huge, like, really nice Polish guy as well. Yeah, so anyway, that's just irrelevant, right? He was huge. So, after that, I kind of completely got out of nightclubs. I went a couple of times more, but I just couldn't really stay there for much longer. And at this point, I started to get more and more trad, and I think I went to my first mass on campus December of that year. I think it was 2017, and I ate the communion wafer. I ate body of our Lord, completely unaware. I don't know why I said communion wafer. What am I? I ate the body of our Lord by accident, and I was sweating bullets because I thought, to be honest, I was sat there, and I felt something during the act of consecration, because I'd been convinced intellectually of Catholicism for a good 4 or 5 months by then. And I was sweating bullets because I was like, oh my, these people around me are so much better than I am. Like, I know one guy down here. I was sweating bullets, completely sweating bullets. Yeah, so I got into that, and I started to make friends there, and I also brought along a friend of mine, because you see, at the same time, I was sort of mentally dueling between traditional Catholicism and third positionism, quite frankly. I was quite deep into that mentally, and I was reading a lot of work on that. And it drove me, and that particular part drove me in a direction that was, frankly, quite evil. And, like, you see, I got out of the, I suppose you call it, the kind of casual degeneracy. Casual degeneracy, and I moved into, quite frankly, hating people a lot more. And I had a lot of friends of mine that were very, very politically like hard right, like not like campus conservative types, like actually right wing. And so I hardened my heart in that way as I got out of that. And I also began making friends with trads in real life, because it turns out when I got to the campus chapel and I met everyone there, they were very, very trad. And I mean capital T trad. Which kind of surprised me. I mean, like, really did not like Francis tier. This man is 40 pints tall. Yeah. So, it was around this time. Was it around this time? I was still involved in UKIP, but that's another story. That's kind of tangential to this. But in essence, I had an involvement with UKIP. I got into a scuff. I finally said it. A scuff with Sargon, and it was resolved. But basically, that was a very big part of the next year after that. As I developed more into the faith, I started praying the rosary daily, and that has gotten me out of a lot of very bad habits. Now, I was never actually addicted to alcohol, but I was addicted to other things, and that broke them very quickly. Well, maybe not very quickly, but you know, I broke that eventually. Yeah, so I developed more into that. I was also despairing because my course was very, very difficult at that point because, but frankly, a lot of the professors were very very legalistic. I'll say I'll say something nice. We're very legalistic with the marking, and so I was developing off in that direction. I did my first Lent. I developed more into the faith, and then eventually I moved in with a friend and started a job, and that job went very, very poorly because, well, for a number of reasons. First of all, I had a 2.5-hour commute. Secondly, I didn't really enjoy working there because it was with technology that I didn't like, because I was writing websites and maintaining an old database, and also because I think the place had a really high employment. It turned out people very quickly. They had data entry people come and go while I was there at least once, and I was only really there for 4 months, and I burnt out and completely went. And that was around the time I got out of politics. In December 2018, I want to say, around there, and I lost the job then as well, because I was ill. So then I entered 2019, and that's when I completely, basically dropped politics entirely. I dropped all of that nonsense, and I started working pretty much full time on my faith. I also started this channel because I figured that I could get paid to read into the faith and then provide it to other people in a way that they'd be able to understand. Because one of the advantages I had from my childhood is that I was pretty good with very hard, complicated works, and if the patristics aren't hard and complicated, I don't know what is. And so I could translate that well over to other people in a way that was easy to understand, and that has largely succeeded. I was paying my rent. It actually got me through that year, this channel. So I thank you all that are watching for that. And eventually, like, I became better and better friends with this trad group. And so I eventually ended up moving in with them. And this will explain why I'm not necessarily very friendly to more trad opinions. Because I'd kept all of my friends from when I was in politics, and maybe to a lesser extent. Actually, did I keep any of them from when I was really, really drinking? I don't think I did, actually. I occasionally tried to talk to a few people who were involved at that time, but I'd gotten hardcore into politics, and it kind of frightened some of them off. And I still saw them, and I was still drinking with them, and it really bothered them, because they thought that I was this massive hardcore trad, because I actually met, I want to say, yeah, one girl who went away and watched my channel and was really fascinated with it. And I can't remember if that's because one of the guys who I knew from the distributist had told her about my channel and she'd watched it, or if she'd found it on her own. I think it was the former. But anyway, I kind of had this kind of, I don't know if I'd call it following, but they knew that I had e-clout, basically. And so they assumed that I was this hyper trad, and they were really surprised when I'd go out drinking with friends and they'd sleep on the sofa, not because they were like ridiculously drunk, but because it's how it is. And they weren't happy with that, first of all, and second of all, the thing that really cheesed them off is when they realised that I wasn't interested in any of them, I think, and I was interested in their friend. And you see, one of them had been making moves at me, and I kept repeatedly shutting her down in a really obvious way that pretty much every other girl I've ever talked to, with one exception, has got. And like I outright once told her, no, I'm not. I didn't say I wasn't interested, but I said, look, I'm celibate, right? Like, bluntly to her, and she wasn't from this country, so her English failed her for about 30 seconds, but she still didn't get the message. So it was a mixture of me completely surprising them, because I had very edgy friends who were really into drinking, and and just smoking and mucking around, like people do, and me finding like a girl in their group that was probably I didn't know, I never knew her well enough to say that she was the least trad there, but probably the most sane. Like, she was interested in my Suma. She was interested in my Suma. Like, I remember I was sitting with her talking in the living room, and she was like, "Oh, I want to see your Suma," because we were talking about theology, and I got it out. It's like, "Oh, it's in Latin and English." And it's like, "Oh, okay, I've met someone nice," and that didn't go well. You see, I can't remember. I don't know how much I should talk about this, but in essence, I believed at the time I had very good reason to blame the girl who I'd rejected repeatedly, and it basically ended up in complete flames, because I am not, like, contrary to popular belief, I am not a simp. I am not a particularly nice man to girls. Sometimes out of obliviousness, sometimes because I just want them to leave me alone, and so I will, like, crash them into the ground like any man, verbally or otherwise. Or maybe not obviously in an illegal way, but you know what I mean, right? And a lot of what bugs me about these girls is that they were very, very pharisaical with the religion, right? They'd make arguments like, "Oh, I can't speak into my microphone on a Sunday." I remember I had this discussion with one of them, and a lot of mucking around with very, very strange ideas. I remember I met one of their friends from the TLM that I never went to, and he started arguing. I can't. It was either, I think it was penance on Sundays. And I thought that was immediately very strange, and I went and talked to a priest friend of mine who was a church historian, and he was like, "What? That's very strange." And you see, I was kind of very like, I probably want to back away from this, but yeah, it broke down into very, very very open fighting, because one girl wouldn't get the message, and I was not about to back down, and it ended in both, like, there was 2 guys and 3 girls, right? The 2 of us, and this is why I had the sort of hiatus, right? The 2 of us guys getting kicked out of the house, and myself almost getting kicked out of the uni. Now, granted, they didn't believe what they said. You see, I still don't know. I'm not going to say what I heard, but I don't know exactly what went on there. But suffice to say, there was enough of a drama that I didn't really talk to them again. They tried to talk to me again, but it didn't work. And I sort of saw the nastier side of tradism, and I really didn't want anything to do with that, because I'd seen how those sorts of people had behaved. I realised that was a sort of tendency that I wanted to avoid, and yeah, so I'm not very interested in anything to do with that kind of thing. So, Renaissance simp. No, I couldn't speak into a microphone on Sunday because I was recording an audiobook, right? And so she said, "Oh, that's work on a Sunday." It's like, no, it's not, because I went and looked up the canon law. She cited the canon law at me, and I went to her, "Look, it's not servile work, because servile work is the sort of work that impedes the body more than the mind, and speaking into a microphone isn't like that." So I was justifying it, and she was like, not very happy with it. But yeah, after that, I sort of backed out. A lot more things happened in my absence, because I couldn't go back to the chapel at my university after that for about 2 months, because I didn't want to see them. And I hope that I'm keeping this as low information as possible, just to give you an idea of why I'm kind of against the tradism stuff. Although I really like the mentality that is behind it initially, because I approached that kind of thing. But yeah, I sort of I sort of stayed out for about 2 months. Providence intervened, and I was able to pretty much go back to living life as I had beforehand, and frankly, a lot more happy, in a much more happy way. So that's essentially why I'm kind of anti-trad. Trust me, Dionysus, you don't. Yeah, so I completely ignored my notes for those 40 minutes. But I hope that this kind of makes sense. If you guys have questions, please stick them in the chat. I'll scroll back up to the top. If you want to go onto the riot at riot.renaissancemen.xyz, you can get questions in there as well, and I will be willing to answer those. Anyway, I'm going to go and refill some water. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Let's check the riot very quickly. That is at riot.renaissancemen.xyz if you are able to go on there. It's a completely free platform where I own the entire server that runs it. Okay. So Isidore asks, what was your experience with PUA? Did you succeed, and what sources did you use? I actually fully regret the use of PUA techniques, right? Because I did use some. I never engaged in promiscuity ever, but I came very, very close. Because it kills me. It really kills me, this girl, because I actually really like her. So I met this really lovely girl who who kind of stuck in my mind, because I remember the very first time I met her, like I liked talking to her, she was alright, and then as I was leaving, she goes to me, I'm not sure I'll ever see you again, but I just want you to know I really liked seeing you. And I was like, whoa, never had, like, there are girls who would, follow you home. Like, I had one girl, like, leave her boyfriend at the McDonald's and follow me home. That was a gross experience. I didn't realise that at the time what she was doing, but in retrospect I do. But she, like, I really liked this girl, and so I did a little bit of the techniques when I had a little bit too much to drink one night, and it got her interested in me. And yeah, I remember I was at her house for about, I'll say a while, because I want to keep it ambiguous if they ever see it, and I had to turn them down. And I remember as I left, I actually prayed a rosary beforehand to make sure I wouldn't do anything untoward. But I remember like leaving, and she was giving me these eyes, as girls are often apt to, but it was like filled with this strange pain. Like this mixture of like, the natural frustration you get out of being turned down, but also this pain, because like, she is probably the only girl I met at uni that I actually really cared about at all. I mean, I did care about others, obviously, but like really cared about. And I feel a great deal of shame for that. She'll probably never watch it, but hey ho. Gonna check the general chat. Is there anything in the general chat? Is it common among the promiscuous in Britain to have 100 plus body counts? My spiritual director brings up his experience dealing with women who are like that. This woman using some spell to attract guys. She had at least 9 abortions, and after the spell for exercise, she smelled like a rotten corpse. I don't actually know. I think. You see, the thing is that with university, I think that at least, maybe not a third, about a third, I'd say, but people don't really go out much at all. Not because they're just, not just because they're like, introverted. There are some who are like that. Like I had a housemate who was a really, really nice guy, became Catholic very soon, who was very, very recently, who was kind of like that. I mean, he still went out, but he was very quiet, just dispositionally very quiet, whereas I'm really not. Right? You wouldn't guess from my channel. I'm very... I used to love nightclubs. Yeah, but a lot of them are just too mentally ill. Like, there's one of these girls messaged me for... she messaged me every night at, 3, 4, 5 a.m, say how horrible she felt. And obviously, I knew that she wanted me to... get with her, but I wasn't going to. But I still kept an eye on her and took care of her. I think a lot of it is that. I think that maybe 10% of the girls are really that bad. But, a lot of the girls are out and about. But they're nowhere near that bad, I don't know for certain. Right? I don't read minds. I can't read eyes either, because it, as much as it could be something as disgusting as having 9 abortions, a lot of it is just pure loneliness, and that's the real appeal of Catholicism, right? Like, aside from, this is why I preach it so strongly, and so in such a fiery way, and to the point where it turns a lot of people in my real life off. It's because I know that most people are in one of two states. They're either content or they're miserable, and the happiness that the embracing the cross gives you, the happiness of embracing Christ and acknowledging that He loves you, and this isn't not as some sort of exercise in Sunday school of Jesus loves me, Jesus loves me, which is indeed true, but in an actual real sense, something that actually has implications in the real world, right? People realizing that and following Him would change so many lives. It would change them from lives where they live off takeaway and witter away their days, being promiscuous or just taking just tons of drugs. Like I remember seeing in like being in the halls and people just smacking into the walls at like 3 o'clock in the morning because they were on something, right? Like no one who's truly happy does that, but the cross does bring that. Christ does give you that, and I can tell you that from personal experience as someone who was kind of like just Christian as a very little kid, was atheist as a teenager, and a deist as a very young adult. I can tell you that it's changed my life so much. And that's why I'm so aggressive with it, and particularly with the true form, because you see, if you give them a watered down Hillsong version or a heretical version, then you're going to diminish the effect, because even though I don't know how culpable these people would be in this sort of Christianity, it's not going to give them the full effect regardless. Let's see. People told me that they'd come out of PUA promiscuous culture, told me it's how absolutely neurotic the whole thing is, plate spinning. I never did plate spinning. I mean, I sort of... You see, with one of the girls I was talking to her because I wanted to meet other girls, and that was about as close as I ever got. Although, you know, like, in terms of talking to more than one girl, right, like, that I don't think that even qualifies as plate spinning, because plate spinning is when you keep multiple girls on the go at once to extract maximum carnality from them. I never did that. But I was, you know, talking consciously to more than one girl at once to build up confidence, which I don't think was wrong, because I was never in a relationship. But, you see, I can imagine why that would really tire you out. Right, so I'm going to check the YouTube chat now, because I'm sure there's a lot. Oh man, the chat is pretty active. Yeah, you see, the thing is that I often come across in my videos as very stuffy, because I like being very precise with the language that I use. Perhaps a bit spurgy. But, yeah, I don't act like that in real life. I'm not like the other spurgs. There isn't a dull moment in your political journey, is there? Look, I'm not giving you the half of it. I'll tell you, I was... Like, I'm telling you, Charlie, I was doing some stuff that I can't mention on stream, and to be honest, I tell you, I believe fully in Providence, because like I was an edgy guy in some very dangerous situations, and I'm very lucky for getting out of them because I was like insane. It was absolutely insane. You see, I think that's the reason why... Actually, I won't say that. You drank... yeah, like I said, it was 30 and the worst night. Yeah, how old am I? I'm 22. Do you think you can logically move from deism to Christianity? You see, the problem is that I'm not a particularly intelligent person, so I didn't actually... factor in the logical conclusions from Aquinas' cosmological argument for a year. So it didn't click in my head that maybe by virtue of God being the beginning of all things that he sustains all things. I thought the things... I got rid of the chain of causality. Like I accepted the causality, but I didn't fully read in the conclusions of the chain of causality, which is why I took so long to get to Christianity. Thoughts on Swedenborg and near-death experience descriptions of heaven and hell. Run from Swedenborg as fast as you can. Any of that spiritualism stuff is very dangerous, and you're liable to fall into pre-list. Mennonite, that's the one. That Mennonite, that's praise of folly. Mathoma, yeah, Mathoma was ultimately the guy who converted me. No, I pretty much immediately chose Catholicism because I knew historically. Well, I had an appeal from Orthodoxy, and I don't know why I didn't pick it initially. I think it's because there wasn't a church nearby. But that became more and more clear as I read into the history. But with Protestantism, I knew... I believe it was it from Mencius Mollberg at that point? It was probably Mencius Mollberg. That the modern world had emerged out of Calvinism. And because at school I'd done extensive study on Elizabeth I, Mary I, and Edward VI, although I did initially very strongly side with Edward VI and with Calvinism, I think I realised in retrospect that, particularly when I learnt of things like the Pilgrimage of Grace, that it was a very much top-down movement. I also didn't like the fact that you'd rely on just the Bible alone, and that the Protestantism was often very emotional, and you know the Hillsong thing. I need to really make a video on Hillsong, because they're more than just this kind of cringy, shake your hands together and love Jesus kind of thing. That there's a lot more to it that's pretty nasty. Particularly their theory on atonement, I don't like. I don't know if the Polish guy was Catholic. I wasn't buff at the time when I was in that nightclub. SSPX types, getting there. No, I never physically had a fight with Sargon. No, I never did that. So, isn't it a sin to take the Holy Host not being a sacred grave? We see, I didn't know that, so it was a material mortal sin, so I just confessed it. How do I find a trad zoomorph? I'll tell you when I do it myself. Renaissance sim. How do they behave? I don't want to go into too much detail, because you see, the thing is that I completely forgive them for everything they've done, because I think that they were acting, because you see, the thing is that with these girls, they weren't really quite so exposed to the rest of the uni's culture, and so when they met a guy like a friend of mine who was very much of kind of a flirty guy, they kind of got the wrong impression. And although the reaction, I'll leave it at that. I think that they weren't really thinking. I think if I'm entirely honest with myself, like, as much as I could, get irritated about it, I don't think they were thinking that much. Is all still in uni? No. Would you say it's more about the toxic people who are trad rather than the bare meaning and contents of trad? Well, orthodox is fine, right? I'd rather be orthodox. I don't want to be trad. I want to be orthodox. I want to be correct in my view of the faith. But I think that a lot of the trad temperament comes out of the way that trads, learn things, right? And you can read things like Father Chad Ripperger talking about how the traditional movement is getting kind of Gnostic. You see, it's all well and good to read something in a book, but it's often when you meet people in real life that you realise that they're in a bad place. Because you see, a lot of the way that heresies are worked out is that you can look at the spiritual effect on people, and if it makes someone more arrogant, then it's probably bad. I was expecting debunking of arguments from Protestants and Orthodox. Well, you see, the whole Protestant thing, I knew by the time that I was choosing Christianity that Protestantism didn't make any sense. I can't remember if I'd read things like the Epistles of Ignatius of Antioch at that point, but I knew that it didn't really make much sense because there was no sustaining authority of the scriptures. With the Orthodox, it was more a matter of there wasn't a church nearby, and then further on it was more a matter of reading into different canons and stuff like that, which really is this stream isn't about. It's more about letting people know that I'm not actually this really stuffy Jansenist Puritan, because I think I give that impression too much. I'm not going to explain how they misbehaved. Rejecting trad girls is dumb. Look, I'm not gonna. If I don't feel it for some girl, then I'm not going to, go out with her, because what's the point? If I've got an intuition about a particular girl, why would I bother? There are some really, really strange girls out there. So I reject trad, whatever that means, because of some girls. Am I not getting it? It's more because of the tendency and the behaviour. I'm just reading Doughboy's comments. Thoughts on Rouge? I think he had a much quicker conversion than I did. Although, then again, I never really got as massively into the PUA stuff as he did either. I think that the whole campaign against the masks stuff is a little bit ridiculous, even if the masks are technically pointless. You know, like, he says things like, oh, this is a compliance test. It's like, well, so what, you know? If it's a compliance test, right, and the church is forcing me to do it, I will act on that because the church is telling me to, or because I want to use a business, not because the central government is stamping out my freedom. They're doing it anyway. They're going to do that anyway, regardless of whether I comply or not. How do you feel about the Zoomers that are joining the trad movement? How do you feel about Zoomers joining the church in general? Look, I like that people go more towards the trad movement than not, because you see, at least in the trad movement, and this is one of the good things I got out of them, is that they have a really good emphasis on theology, right? They are very, very, very obsessed with reading into their history, and that is something that I love, and that's a really good thing to have. I wish that the general, like, orthodox part of the church would do that, and the more calm people, because, you know, you have people like Bishop Robert Barron who do that, but it's not really to the same painstaking level of detail like someone like Father Chad Ripperger, who is probably my influence of influences. I even talk like him in theological argument, right? Like, I'll go and define, and you see, this is why I think people think that I can come across a bit spurgy, because I'm like, I always like to define things in a very rigid, almost legalistic sense when I'm talking to people in like a discussion. If I'm aiming to convert someone, I won't do that, because I know that doesn't work. But if I'm having like a debate, I'm gonna like crush a person into the ground. Oh man, there's a lot of comments. I wasn't expecting so many people to come along to this. Yeah, you should, anti Weimar Roy. You should regret that. Are we the children of infantilized parents? I suspect it might be. No, I don't. In my case, it certainly wasn't the case. But you know, there were illnesses about, and so you know how it is. It's life. Like, I don't think they could have helped it. I know that one of them certainly couldn't help it. Why don't you make more videos debunking Islam? Islam is more likely to take over society than secular racism, atheism, because Islam has strong families. Well, the trouble is that Islam is being subverted by secular atheism faster than it can radicalize itself. The whole radicalism in Islam is a reaction to a secularization that's been going on for centuries. And in the West, it seems to be increasingly succeeding. I'd much rather re-establish like a Catholic presence in Britain and have the secular atheists gone than deal with Islam at this point, I think. But I may well be wrong. And besides, I don't really know much about Islam. I know that there are some really strange hadith about Muhammad being strangled by the supposed angel that revealed to him the prophecies, but that's not always accepted by all Muslims. I don't know enough about Islam to really begin to take it apart. I'm going to check the riot again. Do something. To what extent are you a Linux user, asks David. Well, you see, I do use a lot of Linux. I have 4 Linux systems. I have the server that runs the Riot, which is a Debian computer. I have a machine learning machine, which I've currently got my logo on, which is another Debian. I have an Arch Linux laptop, which I'm getting an SSD for, which is Arch, well, yeah, like I say, Arch Linux. And I have a Raspberry Pi somewhere, which I can't find, which is running Raspbian. I use Linux quite a lot, obviously, for the server and stuff, but I'm going to be increasingly using it next year as I get more into system security. And I think I'm going to start using it more because it's just simply better than Windows 10. Like, all the stuff I'm doing right now is through Windows 10. None of the stuff that I did was under Linux, right? You see, the whole time that I was doing this, I was well aware that if anybody wanted to spy on me, they could have spied on me the whole time, and I didn't care, because I realised that even if I used Linux, then I could be found out really easily anyway. You see, actually, this is for another stream. This is for another stream. I probably shouldn't like change the stream from Catholicism to Linux. I'm smoking Nazmol. I'm not like the other smokes, yeah. Is C.S. Lewis in heaven, hell, purgatory, or limbo? I don't know. Do you think you can be celibate without becoming a priest or monk instead of trying to make a family as a Catholic? Well, yeah, you see, the Desert Fathers weren't actually formally monks for the most part. They just sort of went out into the desert. There wasn't really formalised monasticism in the West until St. Benedict, and even then that took some time to get established. And there were still a lot of hermits who lived around in Ireland, like off the coast of, I think it's the coast of the south of France, and they very rarely lived in what were called cenobiums, which were what you'd think of as a modern monastery. A lot of them were hermits, and the very first monks were hermits. So I mean, it's perfectly possible, but you see, you have with lifelong celibacy, you have to be doing it for a positive reason and not for a negative one. Because I actually lived with a MGTOW once, and he did it entirely out of, frankly, understandable fear of girls, because he was afraid of, you know, the whole divorce problems that we have in the West. But you can't do celibacy out of a sense of fear. It has to be a positive reason, like, you know, a girl would get in the way of me answering confessions, or calling down our Lord onto the altar, or something like that, or, you know, I really love praying, or something like that. It needs to be a positive reason, but yeah, of course it's possible. How important is political affiliations in finding a significant other? Obviously not a commie, but what about normie-con girls? I have seen some... I'll put it this way, avoid girls that are political. I wouldn't get involved. Varg didn't convince me of the existence of God. Stop. Thoughts on Baptists? I actually know this Baptist guy from UKIP when I was involved in it, and he is a lovely guy, and frankly, much more of a chill guy than I ever could be. I think that the Baptist theology is very, very flawed for a lot of reasons, because it inherits a 16th century framework which is heretical. But I think that Baptists themselves are generally, well, I mean, at least in my experience, like, I know of one that's all right, and I know of one who I'm not so sure of, right? But they're people, right? They should become Catholic. That's what I think of them. Are you still in contact with the people from that time, not just the Polish guy? I don't have contact with the Polish guy. I was talking to him for I think I was with him for about 10-15 minutes, and he seemed like a nice guy. Do you think that we as Catholics should let Sargon into... Yes! He's not going to collapse half of the church. How do you build a social circle? I've been completely self-isolated even during my school years, and I've only realised it's causing me immense anguish. Well, you know what I did? Because you see, I think everyone has some sort of, social misgivings, right? Like, even I have it, and I'm normally pretty out there. What you do is you force yourself to go out and then just meet people, and if you fail, you fail, and you just keep going until you meet people you like, and who like you. Okay, let's see. Why don't you consider the Bible to be an authority, considering it's written by saints? I do. I mean, I think this is a mean question. Obviously I do, but, trad girls tend to be very scrupulous and uncharitable, at least where I live. I don't know if it's scrupulosity, but yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more chilling out. there needs to be a lot more chilling out. The reason why I'm so direct in my videos is that a lot of people are coming here looking for actual advice, and so I give the most rigid advice I can, because I don't like leading people astray. That doesn't mean that I'm right, but it's important that I don't deceive people on points of doctrine. And ideally they will follow that, but what was it? I think it was St. Teresa of Lisieux described a sin compared to God as like God taking like a little drip of water onto his finger and flicking it into a fire, right? Sin, I mean, Christ has trampled down death by death. There's no sense letting... And, you know, I've had scrupulous times. Recently I've been quite scrupulous because I've been away from confession for going on 4 months, right? There's no sense despairing about sin because you have to go to confession to confess it. You should obviously work on it because it infinitely offends God. But God will just trample it down if you're only contrite. So don't worry too much about it. And that's what these girls need to do. They need to chill. And I understand why they do it, because they're scared of the modern world. They see it around them, and they are worried that it'll eat them up. And so they want to live in the exact opposite way. A lot of these girls have had very damaged childhoods. A lot of these girls who go very trad and they want to escape from it. And they need to be provided that opportunity, but the only way that can really have an effect is if they learn to fall in love with Christ and not to follow the law rigidly alone. They need both. Carthusian Sargon. That'd be quite cool. Do you know many Zoomer Catholics? Well, yeah, I do. I know quite a few of them. What are your thoughts of the lack of real manhood these days? How do you, as a man, view it? You see, the reason why I got involved with a lot of... I used to follow a lot of masculinity people on Twitter because I realised I lacked it. I realised there was a lot that I lacked. And so I figured, I can learn from these people. And, you know, to an extent I did. I picked up the very basics. But the real crux of it is being able to take up your cross, you know, drag it up to Calvary and be nailed upon it, and just to submit to that, right? It's about fortitude. It's about love. It's about faith. It's about hope. It's about temperance. It's about prudence. It's about justice, right? It's about the virtues. And people don't know about that now. And I learnt that while I was doing all of this stuff, and I learnt that a lot of these masculinity people are just sort of signalling their masculinity, because, you know, understandably, right? Like, why would you set up a masculinity channel if you didn't think that it was a problem? And I mean, I'm not asserting that these people are somehow effeminate. I mean, I don't know them for certain, but I know that, at least in my case, it comes from a point of thinking that you lack it. So, yeah, I guess that's an answer. I'm going to check over to the riots again. Yeah, I've heard about Arctics. Let's see. Okay. There's a lot of... You see, the thing I'm worried about is I see there's a lot of comments on the stream, and I don't want it to snap down to the bottom again. Oh, Alice Grant. Oh, poor girl. I know about Alice Grant. She's the Brexit girls. Her and her... is she the blonde one, or is she the brown-haired one? I can never remember. By the way, like there are a lot of these girls who are involved in this kind of based right-wing circle, and I read one of these girls' posts, and you can tell like she's trying very hard, but she doesn't know where to go. Right, a lot of them. Like, I'm not saying this about Alice Grant specifically, but I don't. You see, they want to be somewhere somewhat stable. I think a lot of them, and a lot of them obviously do just want money, but I can't like put that onto anybody because I don't know. I just know that I pity them a little bit. Okay, so we're going to take... Let's see if there are any more questions before we bring this to a close. Who is your favourite pope of the 20th century and why? Oh... That's a difficult one. You know what? I'm going to say Pope St. Paul VI, because he wrote Humanae Vitae. Although Pope St. John Paul II wrote Theology of the Body, and that's a huge expansion on that. You see, I mean, you know, there's the obvious choice of is it Pope Pius X? I think it's Pope St. Pius X. right? Who, I mean, you see, it's a hard one. It's a hard one. I don't really know enough about it to choose, but my initial choice is Pope Saint Paul VI. Also because he did the Second Vatican Council, which of course is gonna wind up a lot of people because they think that it's a heresy when it isn't. Because they judge it by the immediate consequences in the wake of the entire sexual revolution. But I think Humani Vitae alone is really good. So yeah. I know that people weren't going to be happy with me saying that, but hey ho. All right. What bothers me about Baptists is that the base of their theological errors are things even Catholics come to. They basically believe in the extremes of baptism of desire and reject the sacrament. Well, you see, baptism of desire is a very interesting one because baptism of desire is something that I had a lot of problems with. Not because I didn't believe in it, but because I didn't know the definition. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Because from what I understand, from reading the Tome Ad Ite blog, is that baptism of desire has two parts. Desire for baptism, be it implicit or explicit, and some sort of extraordinary act of charity. Now, if you're committing an extraordinary act of charity, that's directly a theological virtue which comes directly from God. And if you desire baptism implicitly through loving God, then yeah, that makes perfect sense why someone will be saved. But that's incredibly rare as well, which also means that they're saved by the grace of the Church, which is of course the mystical body of Christ. I've discovered that these red pillars forget about humility, true humility, and devotion makes you a man. A lot of it is that. A lot of these guys are really terrified of women, I think. And, understandably so, because they can look at the statistics and they can see it. And I mean the sort of pickup artist types as well. They're understandably very scared of women. But, you see, humility is realizing that you have to get on with them anyway. And you're probably meant to be married and have children and have to take a risk. Like, I was talking to one of them yesterday who's getting very angry about having to meet and marry a girl who was, promiscuous in the past. And I said, look, if it's God's will, it's God's will. The prophet Hosea had to do that. How are you any better than that saint? If God demands that I marry a girl like that, then that's God's will, basically. I mean, it's going to be hard. I don't doubt that, but to be petrified of that kind of act to the point of just not getting married and not having children is ridiculous. There's no sense. So you just submit to it. You submit to it, which is what humility is. I'd like to ask your opinion on this matter. I've been a practicing Roman Catholic for about 2 years, yet I don't go to church, for I always feel like the sermons and the homilies are acts towards and audience in the end of the... I don't know. Yeah, you should go to church, because if you miss church on Sunday, that's a mortal sin. If you're doing that intentionally, that's a mortal sin. You need to go to confession and confess that. What are your thoughts on the Jocko Willink and the Golden One? Sorry, it's jumped down. I love Jocko Willink. He's one of the few secular, or seemingly secular people that actually understands humility. And that's a tremendous grace. I listened through part of one of his books, and it was very, very good as well. The big one, what's it called? Extreme Ownership. The Gold One is... You see, the Golden One is one of these... He's probably the pagan that I like the most, because he's actually trying hard, and he's working for his family, right? I don't necessarily agree with his politics, but I think his heart's in the right place, and that's what matters. Hopefully, God will introduce him to the church. What will a Biden presidency look like? I don't actually know, because I don't know the future. Who's your favourite trad e-golf head? Make a stream about why you changed your mind about Vatican II. In essence, it's because I talked to someone who's involved in the hierarchy. But basically, you see, a lot of the problems that came out of Vatican II were mostly just infiltration. Because, like, Bella Dodd, if you've heard of her from people like Return to Tradition. I think you'd be a lot better listening to Bishop Robert Barron, because he's finally responding to the people who are very anti it. Finally, at long last, and I think he'll do a good job. I knew you'd pick a pope that the Sades would dislike, yeah. And I'm not picking it just because it winds them up. In fact, that's a very secondary thing. It's just I really like Humanae Vitae. If I wanted to pick someone, if I'd have picked someone purely for someone that the Sades would have disliked, it would have been someone like Pope St. John Paul II because of the Quran incident. Also, was it him that... Yeah, another thing that I've noticed that Sades and Trads don't really like, and that's St. Faustina's diary, because it was on the index of prohibited books for a while under, I think it was Pope St. Pius the 11th? Or was it Pope Pius 11th? It was probably someone like Pius the 11th or Pius the 12th. I can't remember which one. But yeah, after... I think it was Pope St. John Paul II canonised her, he announced it to the world that it was very good, right? And they're saying, oh, well, there's a contradiction there. It's like, is there? I mean, Galileo's books were on the index for 130 years. In fact, there's been a lot of books that have been stuck on the index that were removed off because they were perfectly fine, and they were often done for different, times change with books, right? You're not going to be so scandalised by Galileo's work now. Actually, maybe the one where he's got the dialogue where he's mocking the Pope, you might be. But, like the raw scientific work, scientific on quote work of Galileo isn't going to scandalise a modern Catholic out of the faith. It may have in 1630. Maybe the treasure was the feds that we met along all the way. Let's see. Oh yeah, someone stuck some questions on the riot. I'll have a look. Sorry. Is God's will just a single path? Well, God has two wills. He has the permissive and the active. And I suppose you mean by single path, you mean it's one chain of causation. It's like, yeah, because there are no additional universes. There's no additional creation. There is creation. Are you aware of sequences by Eliezer Yudkowsky of the Rationalist movement? What is the Catholic equivalent? I've heard of that name before, but I don't know about the book specifically. A comprehensive, unified text series of texts that are meant to refine the way of thinking, logic, bias, fallacies, etc. There's a lot of Catholic reading lists out there. I'm talking to a baptile Buddhist, who says that even if Catholicism is true, he just doesn't feel the need to consider it because it doesn't fear death. Well, I think he'll fear it when it's very warm, and doesn't think that he has anyone to answer to or anything to answer for. He just wants to do a sort of pseudo-pagan rituals for a vibe, but doesn't think serious belief is particularly important. How would you approach this? And what should I read to understand about it? Just pray for the guy, right? If he says, like, if he's not interested in the truth, as you're telling me here, you need to pray for him. Alright, you said you said that you move around in more edgy circles than I do, so I assume you know about Murdoch. Yeah, I used to know a couple of people at uni that watched it, and I've seen it a few times as well, yeah. What do you think about this type of people, and is there any hope for their conversion? I remember I was listening to a Q&A stream from them, and they didn't strike me as... I mean, they were artists primarily, right? I think they need prayers. I think that kind of right wing is often very hurt and very damaged, and that movement, which I was never ever involved in that at all, and to the best of my knowledge, I never held any. I've never held any Nat Sok views. But, you know, it degenerates people. It makes them very unhappy. They're very hopeless people. They need prayers and they need love. And their ideology is completely devoid of it. Possibly becoming Eastern Catholic. What are the best books on the papacy from a Catholic perspective? Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, you see, what I did mostly was I just read through the ecumenical councils and their history. If you were to buy a book on the ecumenical councils, that would probably be a good start. Besides that, yeah, I just read the Church Fathers. I mean, the thing is that a lot of the Orthodox get their fathers from a Catholic priest's collection of patristics anyway. So just keep reading the Fathers and find books on the ecumenical councils and look into who accepted what canons at what councils and what synods. Like, learn the difference between the fallible and the infallible magisterium as well. That's a really important one. Because the infallible magisterium is where it really matters. I got so upset the other day because a lot of trads were being so disrespectful about Faustina. Yeah, I mean, she's a saint. She was. I can't remember. I can't remember if it was Paul. I think it was Maximilian Kolbe that John Paul II said was the saint of the century, the 20th century. Actually, my mistake. Fuck, Vickers and Ted Kaczynski become Catholics are the optics we need. Galileo didn't have any scientific proof though of the heliocentric model. That was why people had such a problem with him. Do the three persons of the Trinity have different characteristics? No. Can we differentiate between them? Yes, we have the Athanasian Creed for that. They're a subservient relationship where they're 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. Okay, we need a strong president. You see, I think that Trump will win in November. I think he will because they've just burnt down so much. Anyway, guys, we've been going for nearly an hour and a half. Final questions. There's a bunch on the riot. Actually, I quite like how the riot is kind of heating up. There's a real community atmosphere that's coming along, and I really like it. We were on their design. We were helping this German guy design a fence because he had snails that kept on trying to eat his potatoes, and he didn't want to use the beer trick because the beer trick was bringing the snails in from the garden next door. So we were talking about how he could get the potential difference, that is the voltage, on the wires of this electric fence to stop the snails from eating the potatoes, right? But the trouble is that if you put it at too high of a voltage, say 12 volts, the snails explode. So you've got to be very careful with that. But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. It's really nice. I'm very happy with how it's going. It would be happier if it were more active, but you see, it's getting there, and I really like this. No, Pete asks again. No, I mean, does following God's will just a single path given to you? Sorry for lack of clarity. Or does God give options to you that are just as good? There is going to be a single path for you, like it or not, and God already likes it. There's always multiple goods that you can do at any given time, but the best good, as we learn from the self-abandonment to divine providence, is following God's will at every single moment and being attuned to that. Is the right username the same as display name? I think so. Let's see. Final questions. The Irish flag. By the way, in case it wasn't very clear earlier on, I'm still talking in political ways. I'm still going to respond to political stuff, but I'm in no way involved in politics anymore. I don't hold any ideology at all. I've got influences from my past, and I'll have influences in future, but really, I've just taken the grill pill. In that way, because I don't think that there's going to be any solution to the misery of the countries that we're in, aside from converting them. And I think that's the only way that people are ever going to be really happy in these countries that we live in. What's up with that dog-faced saint? I don't know. What is the dog-faced saint? Yeah. Lots of discussions of different things. Can you answer my question on marriage? Look, mate. I actually don't. What was your question? I can't remember your question. You keep repeating it, Sergio. I'm sorry, but I'll answer it if you repeat it now. Thank you for sharing about your conversion and many other things. No problem. You see, the thing is that I was expecting to go into a lot more detail about how miserable university was, and I prayed that God would lead me in the right way, and really I just ended up talking about girls more. How would you see? You don't convert people through arguing with them, which is something that I should probably start employing in real life. You convert them by convincing them that Catholicism is the happier alternative, because it is. You can use logical arguments to prove that. You don't. You see, for example, you can logically prove a particular Catholic doctrine, because a lot of people will be in a particular church and they will hold beliefs that are logically inconsistent with other ones, and that will make them unhappy. And if you point out that there's a really logical solution in Catholicism, that will often help them out. But it also works from a point of view of like, look, they're a loving community. Christ is really there. The sacraments are there, and they are real. There's a huge history behind it all. There's, just the beautiful churches is enough of an argument for a lot of people. The music. And even if it is a guitar mass, most of the masses I go to are guitar masses. It doesn't matter because Christ is there. It's the golden one black. Imagine retiring from politics at the ripe old age of 22. You see, you've got to remain happy, guys, because you see, there's some people who will say things. I think it was Elder Paisios who said this, right? Like, the world would drive me insane if I didn't have God, and I think that's true to an extent. But there's a lot of really good things left in it. I'm blessed in that I can go out of the house I'm in, and I can walk for about 15 minutes, and I'll get to this field where there are horses everywhere, loads and loads of horses, with these electric fences around them in this kind of valley, and you can just look across it on a nice warm day, and you'll see the trees swaying in the wind, and it's like God created this, and you can look upon it and see its innate beauty. And likewise, like there are some things that are irritating, like some of the ways that people dress, but there's enough beautiful in the world that you just need that. And you can find beauty in other things, like building things. You could spend your time reading through the news and seeing all of the horrific things that are going on in the cities, which they are. Right? They're not so much in Britain. I'm not so worried. In fact, they put up a Black Lives Matter statue where there was the slaver statue. They tore it down, and someone put a Black Lives Matter statue in its place. And literally the next day, the city council came along, took the sculpture and took it to the recycling plant in the back of a skip. Right? That's the attitude of the British government to the insanity of toppling statues, and that was a power move. But there's no sense worrying. There's all of these horrific people in the world that are really hardened into disgusting things, but there's nothing you can do about that. Are you going to let these people rain on your parade, or are you going to have a good time? I'm not going to let them spoil my fun. I'm only here once. I'm going to enjoy it. Imagine being so blind you care more about the music at the mass and don't completely focus on the presence of God. I mean, that's right. Like, you see, the thing is that a lot of people are understandably turned off by that, and likewise by some of the drum masses that I've heard about. But it doesn't matter because Christ is there. You see, you can hear the music and you can say, oh, this is very hippy-dippy. It might even be self-indulgent towards the congregation, but that doesn't matter. It's about the presence of Christ in the substance, under the species of bread and wine. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. There's not even singing. That's actually my alarm on one of my phone. So 1 second. I completely threw off my. Yeah, so if you can hear that, that is Gregorian chant. Yeah, it's about Christ being there. It doesn't matter. Like the church shopping thing is a real travesty as well. You don't even know your local community. Now, it's one thing if you're in the middle of, say, Oklahoma, and there aren't many churches around, and maybe the local church. You see, if the local church is in a really bad way, then work on it. Right? There's no sense. There's no sense letting like these little churches boil and die because they're all old people, and because they do. I don't know, like Novus Ordo Watch told you that they are, invalid or something. I mean, never mind the fact that there are Eucharistic miracles and the church has fully endorsed them, right? It doesn't matter if the priest is some sort of like a liberal, really. I mean, he may well hold views that are heretical, but he can still call down the sacraments. You just be aware of that, and you make you make sure that you don't fall into those particular heresies that you perceive. I think it was Saint Francis of Assisi who said something along the lines of, "If I saw an angel and a priest, I'd bow to the priest first." Now, what I'm not saying is that you should never tolerate heresy at all, but there's often nothing you can do about it. And if it's your local community, then just encourage low-key Orthodox views. So I'm going to do a final check on the riot. And a final check in the chat. Oh, good marriage without Catholic extended marriage. I have a GF. Yeah, get married. You can make one. There's nothing stopping you. It's going to be hard, but all marriage is hard. All marriage is a sacrifice. You have to be prepared to die for your wife, and your wife has to be prepared to obey you in everything. It's going to be very difficult regardless. Now, you've got a harder job because there's no extended family. But, you just have to, you have to knuckle down and do it. If you truly think that's the goal for you, then do it. You don't need my confirmation, man. Anyway, what do I think of Warhammer? I used to play it a lot as a teenager. So anyway, I'm going to bring this stream to a close. Hopefully I seem a little bit more human than in some of my streams where I'm very blunt. Very almost humorless. But yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.